See you, Fernando. Bye, P. P popped up and whisked himself out of the room. Once outside, he felt uncaged, like a freed bird. He descended the flight of stairs like water down a mountain, unlocked his bike and began to pedal steadily up Electric Avenue toward Rose Avenue. He biked past an old Mexican man pushing a shopping cart full of discarded items. P could always hear those carts when he thought of Venice, and the strong arms that pushed them, and the determined feet that moved them, the industrious, leather-weathered and wrinkled Mexican men who retrieved your discarded Coca-Cola cans and Evian water bottles, who dove into your trash bins and recycling containers, and who lived off this city's detris, extruded at the gills from the gallbladder of consumerism, trading in refuse for small metallic coins, gathering them, sending them, heavily taxed by Western Union, to Guatemala, Ecuador, or El Salvador, gathering currency in the U.S. like a toxic-eating algae hell-bent on transmuting a city's waste, this Los Angeles. P saw Mexico in his surroundings. He heard it on the AM radio. He saw it at the yard parties and quincineros. He felt it on the beach where on weekends 1 or 2 sellers of fresh fruit can still be found. Strong, stout Mexican women holding kebabs of fruit in the hot noonday sun, towel over their shoulders to support the load, sweat lined beneath their arms, walking around pasty white Angelinos dreaming of the sun. These fruit sellers, where here only 1 or 2, a vestige of the Mexico that once stood, a trickle down from the thousands of fruit sellers that lined the Baja, but the high guarded towers and well-maintained walls and bullets and rape and violence and all the pain put into a passport or stuffed under a fence or submerged in a sunken ship could not stop what is the essence of a land from being itself. These strong, beautiful, and brilliant Mexicans, their deep ancestral skin and soft Latin-tongue Virgin de Guadalupes lined the shelves of the mercados where they bought Bud Light by the case, or Tecate, or Imperial, and drank as families that would not be ushered from their homeland. They perched around beaten-up old trucks drinking beer, blaring Spanish love songs from an AM radio, its familiar crackle somehow a sign of cultural nobility. P mused on Los Angeles as a name and thought how all names were kinds of maps, and that American was no less Mexico than the USA, that Los Angeles was a Mexican city with a Mexican name. It was our American Mexico. We'd run it over with our imagination and the silver screen and a Coke habit. LA was a Mexican desert scrubbed over by things like the Valley, cookie-cutter houses and porn star green lawns watered from reservoirs hundreds of miles away, water wars, Chinatown. Some good came out of all of this, a lot of bad, but this land wasn't the USA or Mexico or even America. That beautiful America joined from the deciduous forests of the northern region to the holy coasts of the Isthmus of Panama, on down through the southern lungs and jungles to the polished urbana of Buenos Aires, where Argentinian poets once realized that they were people simply standing on an earth. Indeed, P thought, the map is not the territory. P reminded himself that he was standing on God's land, in a word called Los Angeles, that was once a word called Mexico. Prior to the Treaty of Guadalupe in 1848, following the war between Mexican and U.S. forces, this was Mexico. And when all that north of the Rio Grande became the property of the U.S., and all that Wyoming, and all that New Mexico, and all that Arizona, and all that golden California, when all that holy Mexican land became U.S. soil, its occupants could move to the newly defined boundaries, or they could become U.S. citizens. Well over 90% of them stayed. So that is our Mexico. We are Mexico. We never left ourselves. P himself was the descendants of Norway and Ireland and Germany, and a ship that came here with his great-great-great-grandparents called the USS Queen Mary, who journeyed inland to flat upper middle America of farm and potato and corn. He was still waters run deep and bundle up for the winter. He was I can see my breath and I can't feel my fingers. P came from those ice-capped tundras of the north, the lands of Minnesota and Michigan, the truly grand and noble bodies of still water upon this earth, friends of Siberia and Mongolia, friends of Tibet and Sweden, friends of Quebec, Greenland, and Alaska. He was tall and pale and built to be warm.